Millionaire businesswoman Margaret Callahan stood frozen, watching a scene unfold in the side garden of her Greenwich, Connecticut estate. A black sanitation worker, his hands calloused and uniform faded from years of labor, was gently feeding her daughter, Ava. Her avenue. The same daughter she could barely face since the rare viral infection 2 years ago that took her sight, suddenly, completely, and, according to doctors, permanently. Ava was only 9 when it happened. The world had gone dark for her, and for Margaret too, in a way. "There you go, sweetheart," the man said softly, holding a spoon steady. "Almost done. You got this." Ava giggled. That light, bubbling sound hit Margaret like a blow to the chest. She hadn't heard that laugh in months, maybe longer. Her daughter's pale fingers reached up, gently tracing the man's face. "Mr. Darnell, tell me again what the sky looks like today." Margaret flinched. Darnell. The name rang faintly in her ears. She stepped back from the window, hidden behind the silk curtain. She felt something sour and sharp twist in her gut. Not jealousy, not anger. Something deeper. Something like shame. For 2 years, Margaret had buried herself in her company, Callahan and Wren, a nationwide luxury real estate firm. She had broken records, expanded westward, doubled revenue. All while Ava was quietly disappearing behind the walls of this home. Margaret paid for the best nannies, the top therapists, the latest sensory equipment. But nothing brought Ava back. Ava had loved to paint. She'd once said she wanted to be an artist like Grandma and would smear colors across canvases with joy. But since her vision vanished, she hadn't picked up a brush. The art room had become a silent space. The illness came without warning. Optic neuritis, the doctors had said. An autoimmune fluke. Devastating, but untreatable, Dr. Sanderson at Mount Sinai had told her. Margaret had nodded blankly, signed the insurance paperwork, and walked back to her car in a daze. She had been driving when Ava first complained of a dark blur in the middle of everything. By the time they reached the ER, Ava was already seeing shadows. Within 48 hours, it was complete darkness. Margaret had always been strong, a self-made woman. She'd buried her husband Richard when Ava was only 4, raised a child alone, built a company from scratch. But nothing prepared her for this. She hadn't held Ava's hand in over a year. Not really. Not the way Darnell just did, with patience, with gentleness. Not as if Ava were broken, but as if she were still whole. "Ma'am?" Margaret turned quickly. Susan, the longtime housekeeper, stood in the doorway holding a laundry basket. "That man, who is he?" Margaret asked. "Mr. Hayes," Susan replied. "Darnell Hayes. He's with Citywide Sanitation. They do pickup every Tuesday and Friday. He met Ava near the compost bin last week. She'd wandered out without her cane." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "And she's been speaking to him since?" Susan hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They've become friendly." Margaret didn't say anything more. She simply walked past Susan and into the silent hallway, the sound of Ava's laughter still echoing faintly in her ears. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat at the end of her daughter's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Ava murmured something in her sleep and turned her face toward her mother, but she didn't wake. Margaret reached out, then stopped, her hand hovering over the blanket. She stood and left without touching her. The next morning, Margaret dressed in jeans and a sweater, an outfit that hadn't seen daylight since her early startup days. She waited on the back patio with 2 cups of coffee. At exactly 8:20, the familiar groan of the sanitation truck broke the stillness. Darnell stepped down from the cab, nodding to the other 2 workers as they went about their route. When he saw Margaret, his eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, removing his gloves respectfully. "Morning." "I wanted to thank you," Margaret began. "You've been kind to my daughter." Darnell shrugged. "She's a good kid, sharp. Reminds me of someone I used to know." Margaret looked at him closely. His eyes were steady, tired but kind. "Would you like some coffee?" He hesitated. "I should. Please," she added. "Just 10 minutes." Darnell sat across from her on the patio. His large hands dwarfed the porcelain cup. "Most folks around here don't talk to the garbage man." "I'm not most folks," Margaret said quietly. "Not anymore." Over the next half hour, Darnell told her about his daughter, Naya, 10 years old, bookworm, went blind briefly from a lupus complication, fought bravely, died in hospice care in Yonkers 3 years ago. "She was fire and glitter," he said softly, "even on her worst days." Margaret blinked hard. "I'm sorry." "Me too." "She trusts you," Margaret said. "Ava, I mean." "I don't take that lightly," Darnell replied. "Sometimes trust is all a child's got left." That night, Margaret did something unplanned. She sat with Ava during dinner. She didn't say much, just passed her the plate, watched her eat. At one point, Ava reached out across the table. "I heard your shoes," she said. "You never sit with me during dinner." Margaret smiled, a little caught off guard. "I think I should change that." Ava grinned. "Darnell says moms need second chances too." Margaret couldn't speak. She simply nodded. And that night, as Margaret lay in bed staring at the ceiling, she realized that something inside her had quietly begun to shift. Perhaps for the first time in years. The following days moved slowly, but with purpose. Margaret began spending more time at home, not in her office on the 34th floor of the Callahan and Wren building in Manhattan, but here, on the patio, in the garden, in the quiet spaces where Ava lived now. Each morning, Darnell arrived like clockwork, always nodding politely, always making time to speak to Ava if she was near the compost bins or walking barefoot in the grass, as she sometimes did to feel the morning, as she put it. One Tuesday morning, Margaret approached him again, this time not with coffee but with an offer. "I'd like you to consider working here," she said plainly. "Not just as a friend to Ava, but as part of her daily routine. I can offer you something fair, and it would mean a lot to me." Darnell looked taken aback, but not because he didn't understand the gravity of the offer. "You want me to quit my route? I've been doing this work for years, ma'am. Not because I love trash, but because it keeps me grounded. Keeps me near people who live in the real world." Margaret hesitated. "Would a part-time arrangement work? I don't want to take you from something important, Ava responds to you. And I don't know how else to help her right now." Darnell looked toward the back of the house, where Ava's white cane leaned against the doorframe like a forgotten memory. "I'll think about it," he said. "But if I do this, I'm not wearing no fancy uniform. And I'm not walking on eggshells. That girl doesn't need another expert. She needs someone to be real with her." Margaret smiled for the first time in what felt like months. "Deal." By the end of that week, Darnell had rearranged his route to finish early on Tuesdays and Fridays. He arrived at the Callahan estate around 11 and stayed through lunch. It started small. He and Ava would sit in the sun near the old cedar tree, and he'd read to her from old Braille books or tell stories of his childhood in Savannah, Georgia. Ava soaked up every word, often asking him to describe colors in new ways. "What does red feel like?" she asked one afternoon. Darnell thought for a while, and then answered, "Red is the way your heart beats fast when you're about to laugh, or cry, or do something big. It's fire and surprise and being alive." Ava smiled and clapped. "That's perfect." Margaret, listening from the porch, felt her throat tighten. Then came the conversation that changed everything. One Thursday evening, Susan approached Margaret as she was reviewing some plans for a new development in Seattle. "Ava said something today," Susan began cautiously. "She said she thinks Darnell's daughter might have been treated by the same doctor who diagnosed her." Margaret looked up sharply. "What?" "She said Darnell mentioned a Dr. Sanderson, that he didn't trust him, that he thinks Naya could have lived if someone else had seen her sooner." Margaret's blood ran cold. Dr. Malcolm Sanderson, the neurologist at Mount Sinai who had diagnosed Ava's condition as irreversible, the same one who had given her no hope, no options. "Where was Naya treated?" Margaret asked, her voice flat. "I think the same hospital," Susan replied, almost whispering. That night, Margaret sat up in her husband's old study and pulled every document she had from Ava's case. Lab reports, specialist letters, MRI images, progress notes. She hadn't looked at them in over a year. She read late into the night, her eyes scanning for any inconsistency, anything she had missed. She found it at 2:17 a.m., a footnote in an email from a junior technician who had raised a concern about Ava's original scans. "Patient shows potential for partial optic nerve response under alternate conditions. Further evaluation recommended." The note had been buried in a long email thread. It had never been followed up. The next morning, Margaret didn't wait for Susan or her driver. She took Ava's file and drove herself to Mount Sinai. Dr. Sanderson wasn't in, but his assistant offered to schedule something for next week. Margaret refused. "Then give me his entire referral record for 2020 and 2021. My legal team will be requesting it anyway." On the way home, she called a former client, one of the top medical malpractice attorneys in New York, and asked for a favor. "Find everything you can on Dr. Malcolm Sanderson and be discreet." Within 48 hours, the truth began to surface. Dr. Sanderson had quietly settled 2 malpractice claims in the last 3 years, one of them involving a young girl misdiagnosed with a degenerative condition. No disciplinary action had been taken, and both cases had been sealed. But the name Nia Hayes was mentioned once, in an email string about a disputed timeline of patient care. Margaret printed everything and placed it in a folder. That night she asked Darnell to stay after Ava went to bed. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, hat in hand. She slid the folder to him. "I know about Naya and about Dr. Sanderson, and I know now that Ava's case may not be what we were told." Darnell's face didn't move for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and calm. "I didn't come here to dig into your life. I came here because Ava reminded me of my girl, and because I made a promise to Nia before she passed, that I wouldn't let another child go without a real chance." Margaret's voice trembled. "Did you suspect from the start?" "I had my doubts," he said, "but I didn't know for sure until Ava told me her doctor's name." Margaret covered her mouth. "And you didn't tell me because it had to be your choice. You had to want to see, otherwise it wouldn't mean anything." That night they sat in silence for a long while. 2 parents from different worlds, connected by tragedy, by guilt, by the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, the damage wasn't permanent. The next morning Margaret made an appointment with Dr. Helena Ruiz, a neuro-ophthalmologist in Boston with a reputation for challenging diagnoses. The consultation was scheduled under an alias, and Margaret drove Ava herself. Dr. Ruiz conducted a full set of tests with newer equipment and a deeper analysis. Her conclusion made Margaret's hands shake. "Your daughter has significant damage," the doctor said carefully, "but there is still some optic response. With targeted treatment and therapy, there's a chance she could regain partial vision, maybe more." Margaret turned to Ava, who had been quiet the whole time. "Did you hear that, sweetheart?" Ava smiled. I told Darnell I could still see light. I wasn't wrong. Tears streamed down Margaret's face. No, baby, you weren't wrong. And as Margaret drove them home from Boston, with Ava humming softly in the passenger seat, she realized this was no longer a story about loss. It was about restoration, not just of sight, but of something deeper they had both lost: faith. The following weeks moved with a sense of urgency and quiet resolve. Margaret brought in Dr. Ruiz and her team under the cover of a wellness renovation at the estate. A section of the guest house was converted into a temporary clinic. Margaret hired 2 full-time care coordinators and brought in legal experts to begin the process of requesting Ava's full medical records, this time with court orders. At night, after Ava was asleep, she and Darnell pored over documents in the study, building a timeline that went beyond Ava and Nia. With Margaret's corporate connections and Darnell's relentless tenacity, they uncovered nearly a dozen children misdiagnosed by Dr. Sanderson over the last 5 years. Some had lost vision, others had undergone unnecessary treatments. All of them had one thing in common: no second opinion, no follow-up, no justice. They reached out to families discreetly, Margaret using her foundation's resources, Darnell leveraging community groups and social workers. The stories were haunting. A girl in Queens misdiagnosed with a degenerative retinal condition when she had a treatable optic nerve blockage. A boy in Syracuse who'd been declared permanently blind but later recovered partial vision after his parents sought experimental care in Canada. Dr. Sanderson had built a reputation for being decisive and efficient. But what became clear was that he had sacrificed diligence for speed, for ego, and perhaps for funding from pharmaceutical studies that rewarded fast enrollment in trials. As the evidence mounted, Margaret and Darnell met with a medical whistleblower attorney who confirmed what they feared. Dr. Sanderson had close ties to 2 pharmaceutical firms running trials on optic nerve degeneration. He had enrolled children, including Naya, in studies without thorough confirmation of diagnosis. In Naya's case, her lupus flare had temporarily affected her vision. But instead of waiting for a rheumatologist's evaluation, Sanderson had pushed her into an experimental regimen. She didn't die from lupus. She died from liver complications tied to the medication trial. The discovery broke Darnell all over again. He sat in the sunroom for nearly an hour one morning, staring at a photograph of Nia in her Halloween costume, dressed as a doctor, holding a toy stethoscope and smiling proudly. She wanted to help people, he said quietly. She died trusting someone who didn't deserve it. But grief, this time, did not leave him paralyzed. It gave him fire, and Margaret matched it with her own. Together, they went public. A month after Ava's new treatment began, Margaret and Darnell stood side by side at a press conference outside the Connecticut Attorney General's office. The backdrop was simple: a white banner with the logo of the Nia Foundation, a nonprofit they had launched together to advocate for second opinions in pediatric neurology. Margaret spoke first, her voice steady but full of emotion. She told Ava's story, her blindness, her diagnosis, and the quiet miracle unfolding as she began to see light again. She described the moment she realized her daughter had been misled, not by fate, but by someone she had trusted. Then Darnell stepped to the microphone. He didn't speak like an activist or a polished executive. He spoke like a father. He told the world about Nia, about the way her eyes lit up when she talked about becoming a doctor, about how she'd held his hand and said, "I trust them, Daddy," and how that trust was betrayed. The fallout was swift. Within weeks, Dr. Sanderson was placed on administrative leave. Investigations were launched. Hospitals reviewed dozens of past cases. Pharmaceutical companies issued carefully worded statements about investigating ethical concerns. But the tide had turned. Margaret's legal team filed a formal suit not just for Ava, but for 8 other families. Darnell spoke at town halls, churches, community centers. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was demanding accountability. Ava's vision continued to improve. Each week, Dr. Ruiz tracked her progress. First, she could distinguish daylight, then shadows, then shapes. One afternoon, she reached out during a therapy session and traced her fingers along her mother's face. "You're real," she whispered. "I can see your eyes." Margaret broke down in tears, holding her daughter like she had when she was a baby. That night, Darnell sat with them at the dinner table. Ava, now able to see partial color, described the tablecloth as blue like the sound of rain. Margaret laughed and said, "That's exactly what I was thinking." And for a moment, they were just 3 people. No wealth, no tragedy, no lawsuits. Just 3 people sharing a meal and a new kind of family. Months later, the Nia Foundation opened its first physical center, a brick building in Yonkers, close to where Darnell had raised Nia. The facility offered low-cost second opinions for children diagnosed with serious neurological conditions. Margaret funded most of the project, but insisted that Darnell's name be the one on the front door. "You started this," she told him. With one act of kindness and a bowl of oatmeal. During the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Ava stood between them holding both of their hands. She wore sunglasses, not because she needed them anymore, but because she liked how they made her feel like a superhero. When the press asked how she felt, she smiled and said, "I'm not scared anymore. I can see where I'm going." Dr. Sanderson's trial came a year later. He was found liable for multiple counts of negligence and unethical medical conduct. His license was revoked. But for Darnell and Margaret, justice wasn't just the verdict. It was in every child who walked into the Nia Foundation, in every parent who asked one more question, in every doctor who now thought twice before rushing a diagnosis. On the first anniversary of the center, Darnell stood beside a plaque on the garden wall. It read, "In loving memory of Nia Hayes, who taught us to ask, to fight, and to see." Margaret placed a single sunflower beneath it, Nia's favorite. Ava, now 10, placed her hand on the plaque and whispered, "Thank you." As the sun dipped behind the building, casting golden light across the courtyard, Margaret turned to Darnell. "I thought I'd built everything I ever wanted, but none of it meant anything until I met you." Darnell didn't respond right away. He looked out at the garden, where children were laughing, chasing bubbles, their parents watching with hopeful eyes. "Sometimes the people who pick up the trash," he said softly, "are the ones who find what's worth keeping." They stood in silence, not as a millionaire and a sanitation worker, but as 2 people who had walked through darkness and come out not just with sight, but with vision. And in that stillness, in that shared peace, they knew they had built something far greater than either of them had imagined, not from bricks or blueprints, but from grief, love, and the courage to see. A girl was cruelly called a chimpanzee by others just because of her dark skin and unusually muscular build. It was a sweltering September morning in Savannah, Georgia. 17-year-old Nia Jefferson stood silently at the edge of Easton High School's student parking lot, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, her heart heavy. Senior year was supposed to be a fresh start. But the moment she stepped inside, she could already feel the judgmental eyes burning into her back. Nia wasn't like the other girls. She knew that. She was taller than most, her shoulders broad, her biceps defined from years of competitive weightlifting. Her father, a retired Marine, had introduced her to the sport when she was just 10. While other girls played dress-up, Nia was flipping tractor tires in their backyard. She loved it, until high school. Her reputation at Easton High had grown fast, and not in the way she'd hoped. People didn't see her discipline or passion. They saw a body they didn't understand, and worse, didn't accept. Some called her Beast Mode. Others, more cruelly, referred to her as Miss Muscle Man. But nothing hit harder than the names that cut through more than muscle. One afternoon in the hallway, as Nia passed by a group of girls from the cheer squad, one of them whispered loud enough to be heard, "There goes Congo Queen." Another snickered, "Nah, that's no queen. That's a straight-up chimpanzee." The laughter stung worse than any fall on the court. Nia kept walking, jaw clenched. She could feel their eyes tracking her, waiting for her to break. The whispers followed her into classrooms and onto the volleyball court. Nia had tried out for varsity volleyball, not because she wanted popularity, but because she missed being part of a team. Coach Sanders, a wiry man in his 50s with a buzz cut and clipboard always in hand, welcomed her strength. "You've got power in those arms. We need that on the court," he said. But it wasn't Coach Sanders she had to win over. It was the girls. Cassidy Lynn, team captain and daughter of a local councilman, was the Queen Bee of Easton High. Blonde, poised, always dressed like she'd walked out of a Target commercial. She saw Nia not as a teammate, but as a threat. It started small, rolled eyes, whispers behind locker doors. But it didn't take long before the jokes turned public. During a team warm-up one day, Cassidy walked by Nia and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Careful, Nia, don't crack the court with those Hulk feet." The girls giggled. Nia stayed silent. Later that week, as they all changed for practice, someone had scrawled "man body" across her locker in red lipstick. Below it, in crude block letters, someone had written "Jungle Girl." Nia stood there, frozen as the other girls watched from behind their phones, snapping pictures, waiting for a reaction. She gave them none. At home, Nia sat at the kitchen table, pushing around her grilled chicken and broccoli. Her mom, Denise, a nurse who worked nights at St. Joseph's, poured herself a glass of iced tea and sat across from her. "You're quiet tonight." "Just tired." "You sure?" Denise asked. Nia hesitated. "Do you ever wish I was more normal?" Her mother looked up surprised. "What's normal, baby?" "You know, like the other girls, smaller, softer, lighter." Denise leaned in. "Let me tell you something. When I was your age, I hated my hair. All I wanted was to look like the girls in 17 magazine. It took me 20 years to realize God made me just fine, and He made you strong and beautiful. That skin of yours, baby, that's royalty. Don't let those girls make you forget it." "But everyone makes fun of me," Nia whispered. "Then they're the ones who need to change their vision. Not you." The next morning, Nia returned to school wearing her favorite hoodie, faded gray, sleeves pulled over her hands. She tried to disappear, but high school doesn't let people disappear, especially not someone like her. During lunch in the crowded cafeteria, Cassidy sauntered over to her table with a smirk. "Hey, Nia, heard you can bench 180. Is that true?" Nia looked up, wary. "Because I was thinking," Cassidy continued, "maybe you and my boyfriend Tyler should have a little contest, just for fun." Tyler, one of the football captains, flexed and grinned. "What do you say, Hulkette?" The table erupted with laughter. One voice in the back called out, "Go easy on her, she might fling him back to Africa." Nia stood slowly, her eyes steady. "No thanks." "Oh, come on, don't be shy," Cassidy taunted. "Unless you're scared to lose. I don't need to prove anything to you." Cassidy leaned in, eyes sharp. "That's right. You already proved you're a freak." That night, Nia lay in bed scrolling through her phone. A TikTok video from earlier that day had gone viral. Someone had filmed the confrontation, edited in clips of Shrek and the Hulk, and titled it, "Savannah's Strongest Man, Oops Woman." It had over 30,000 views in 5 hours. The comment section was worse. Monkey emojis, banana jokes, gifs of gorillas lifting weights. Her throat closed. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The next day, Coach Sanders called her into his office. "I saw the video," he said, folding his hands. "Look, Nia, I'm not here to tell you how to feel, but I do want you to know I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. You've done nothing but work hard." Nia said nothing. "I also got a call from a friend, Coach Barnes over at Armstrong State University. He's coming to Friday's game. You're on his radar." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really? Don't let them break you, Nia. You've got something special." Friday came fast. The Easton gym buzzed with the roar of students and parents. It was homecoming weekend, and the volleyball match against their rival, Camden Hills, was the main event. Nia warmed up with quiet intensity. Cassidy glared from across the court. The game began. Nia blocked, spiked, and saved points like her life depended on it. The scoreboard climbed. Set after set, Easton closed the gap. In the final set, it was tied 14-14. Nia dug deep. Coach Sanders called a timeout. "1 point, girls. Give it everything." Nia nodded, sweat dripping down her temple. She stepped back to serve. The whistle blew. She jumped, swung, and the ball rocketed across the net untouched. Match point. Easton won. The gym exploded. Students cheered, parents clapped, and Coach Barnes approached her after the game, smiling. "You're the kind of player we want," he said. In the background, Cassidy stood, arms crossed, silent for once. The crowd slowly thinned after the game, but Nia remained on the bench, her heartbeat still thudding in her ears, sweat cooling on her skin. Her teammates passed her with high fives and half smiles, the same girls who once laughed behind her back now clapping her shoulder with a casual, "Good job." She didn't know whether to feel victorious or just numb. Coach Barnes had given her his card. She had tucked it into her duffel bag like it was made of gold. A full scholarship at Armstrong State wasn't just an opportunity. It was a way out. But the echo of the crowd's cheers couldn't drown out the deeper wounds. The monkey jokes, the locker graffiti, the TikTok video that still had her face plastered across thousands of screens. That night, back home, she sat on the porch steps under the dull yellow light, knees tucked to her chest. Denise opened the screen door with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and sat beside her without a word. Nia sipped quietly. "They cheered tonight," she said after a while, her voice hollow. "But last week I was just a joke, just a—" She stopped, eyes stinging. Denise didn't look away. "Baby, cheers are easy. Respect takes time. What they said about you, the way they treated you, it was wrong. And nothing about tonight erases that. But you showed them who you are, not with words." With fire, Nia stayed silent, but the knot in her chest loosened just a little. "That college coach," her mother continued, "he saw it too. And if he saw it, others will." Monday came, and with it, a storm of whispers. By second period, Nia had become something different, a kind of legend. Girls who'd never spoken to her were suddenly friendly, offering compliments that felt more like rehearsed lines than genuine words. Cassidy, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Her reign of subtle cruelty seemed shaken, but not gone. There was something colder now in her gaze, something calculating. At lunch, Nia found herself alone at the edge of the quad, picking at her salad. That's when she heard a familiar voice. She really thinks she's something now. Cassidy's tone was low, but sharp. Winning one game doesn't make you less of a freak. Another voice, softer but full of disdain, replied, "She still looks like a linebacker." The laughter that followed was short, bitter. Nia didn't turn around. She didn't need to. That afternoon in the locker room, someone had stuffed her gym shoes with banana peels. A crude drawing of a gorilla, labeled MVP, was taped to her locker. For a moment she stood there, staring at it. Then she tore it down, stuffed the paper into her bag, and changed in silence. That evening, she went to the school's small weight room, the one only a few students ever used after hours. She loaded the barbell, chalked her hands, and lifted. Over and over. Her breath came hard, fast. Each repetition was a rebellion. She wasn't just training. She was reclaiming something. Behind her, the door creaked. She turned, heart racing. But it was Coach Sanders. He stepped in, his usual clipboard replaced by a quiet expression. "Heard about the locker," he said. "I filed a report, but I know that's not enough." Nia wiped her brow with her sleeve. "They won't stop, not just because I won." Coach leaned against the wall. "Number." "But they saw you. Really saw you. And that's the first crack in their mirror." He paused. "Listen, I've been coaching a long time. Girls come and go. But what you have, that fire, that discipline, it's rare. Don't let small minds trap a big spirit." The next day, something shifted. Not in the students, but in Nia. She walked differently, not with arrogance, but with clarity. She wore a fitted shirt instead of her hoodie. She didn't slouch in class. She raised her hand. In English class, when a student made a snide joke about evolution during a discussion on racial slurs in literature, Nia turned to him, unflinching. "You think it's funny to compare people like me to apes?" she said, her voice calm, firm. The room fell silent. The teacher, a pale, bespectacled woman named Ms. Granger, stepped in awkwardly, but the moment had already spoken louder than any reprimand. After class, a girl Nia barely knew, a quiet one from orchestra, caught up with her in the hall. "That was brave," she said. "What you said. I just wanted to say, thank you." Nia blinked, unsure what to say back. That had never happened before. But the peace didn't last. By Friday, Cassidy had another scheme. The school's fall formal was coming up, and posters were plastered across every hallway. "Moonlight on the Marshes." Nia hadn't planned on going. She didn't dance. She didn't fit in. But then she heard the rumor. Cassidy and her friends were taking a vote, mock election style, for formal freak. It wasn't sanctioned, but the students were eating it up. Nia's name was leading the ballot. That afternoon, as she passed the art wing, someone muttered, "Hey, She-Hulk, got your dress picked out? Might need a tailor for that silverback frame." Nia kept walking. She made it to the gym before her breath caught. There, taped to the door, was another poster. A photoshopped image of her head on a gorilla's body in a dress. The words underneath read, "Homecoming Queen?" She tore it down and walked into the bathroom. She didn't cry, not at first. But as she looked in the mirror, the strength she carried so long cracked just enough. She splashed cold water on her face. As she looked up, her reflection stared back. Strong, broad, black, beautiful. She remembered what her mom had said. "That skin of yours, that's royalty." She left the bathroom, walked straight to Coach Sanders' office, and handed him the poster. "I'm not asking for a rescue," she said. "I'm asking for a platform." He nodded slowly. "What do you have in mind?" Saturday night came. The gym was lit in soft string lights, the floor cleared for dancing. The DJ played a slow track. Couples swayed. Cassidy stood near the refreshment table, glowing in a pale blue gown, smiling for selfies. Suddenly, the music stopped. A student from AV stepped up to the mic. "Before we crown the official court, we have a special message from one of our seniors." Nia stepped forward from the shadows. She wore a sleek, emerald green dress. Her shoulders proud. Her hair natural and full. A hush fell. "My name is Nia Jefferson," she said. "Some of you know me. Some of you think you do. I've been called beast mode, Hulk, linebacker, even a chimpanzee. People made posters, TikToks, jokes. But tonight, I'm not here to fight. I'm here to speak. When I was 10, I started lifting weights. I loved how it made me feel, strong, focused, alive. But high school taught me to hide that, because the world still punishes girls who don't fit its mold, especially girls who are black. I spent years shrinking myself so others could feel bigger. But not anymore. The room was silent. One clap rang out, from her English teacher, then another, from the girl in orchestra, and then a wave of applause. Nia stepped back, heart thundering, hands shaking but standing tall. Cassidy, arms crossed, said nothing. But the eyes that once followed her with scorn now looked toward Nia with something new. Respect. When Monday came, it was as if something had shifted across campus. The same lockers, the same bell, the same sticky Georgia humidity. But Nia could feel it in the way people moved around her. Not away from her, not whispering, not snickering behind their hands. She wasn't invisible, nor was she a target. She was seen. The morning announcements even mentioned her by name. Special shout out to Senior Nia Jefferson for her powerful speech at the fall formal. It wasn't a formal apology, but it was a signal, a crack in the wall. Still, Cassidy hadn't said a word. In fact, she'd barely been seen since that night. Some said she left the dance early. Others claimed she'd been too embarrassed to show her face. Nia didn't care. For once, her energy wasn't wrapped around someone else's bitterness. She had bigger things to think about. Coach Barnes had followed up after the game, asking her to submit her academic records and video highlights. A week later, an envelope arrived at her doorstep with the seal of Armstrong State. Inside was a formal letter of intent and a full scholarship offer. Nia stared at the paper in her hands as her mom stood behind her, reading over her shoulder, a trembling hand covering her mouth. Denise didn't say anything at first. Then she pulled Nia into her arms, whispered, "You did it." And for the first time in a long while, Nia let herself cry. Not from pain, not from frustration, but from sheer, unfiltered joy. The following week, the school held a student recognition assembly. It was the usual lineup: academic awards, sports recognitions, club achievements. Near the end, the principal stepped up and said, "We'd like to recognize one student whose resilience and leadership has inspired not just her teammates, but the entire Easton High community. Please give a round of applause to Nia Jefferson." The claps were immediate and louder than she expected. She walked to the stage slowly, her heart pounding in her chest, and accepted a plaque. The lights were warm, the applause real. For the first time, she didn't feel like she had to shrink to fit the space. She filled it. Completely. Later that day, as she left school with her bag slung over her shoulder and that same gray hoodie tied around her waist, she spotted Cassidy sitting alone on a bench near the soccer field. Nia paused. She could have kept walking. She had every reason to. But something made her stop. She walked over and stood quietly for a moment until Cassidy looked up. Her eyes were red, makeup faded. She didn't speak. "Why'd you do it?" Nia asked, her tone calm. "The posters, the names, all of it?" Cassidy stared ahead, not at her. "Because I could," she said quietly. "Because people laughed. And when they laughed, they followed. And when they followed, I felt important." Nia said nothing. Cassidy finally looked at her. "I was wrong." "Yeah," Nia replied, steady. "You were." A long silence passed. Cassidy didn't ask for forgiveness. Nia didn't offer it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But she did walk away with her head held high, feeling something she hadn't expected to. Closure. As the semester wound down, Nia focused on finishing strong. Her grades climbed. Her practices became sharper. Coach Sanders gave her more leadership on the court, even letting her run drills. She started helping younger players with their footwork and form. One afternoon, after practice, a freshman named Leah pulled her aside. "Hey," she said, her voice soft. I just wanted to say thank you. For, everything." Nia smiled, surprised. "For what?" "For being out there. For not hiding. My cousin's been afraid to join the wrestling team because she thinks people will make fun of her. But I showed her your speech, and now she wants to try out." That night, Nia sat on her porch again, this time with her laptop open, a Word document glowing on the screen. At the top, she typed, "My body, my strength. A letter to the girl who doesn't fit in." It wasn't an assignment. It wasn't for college. It was for whoever needed it. For the girl who was told she was too dark, too big, too loud. For the boy who was called names because he danced instead of played football. For the student who never raised their hand in class because their voice shook when they spoke. She wrote until her fingers ached. She poured years of hurt, of strength, of hope into the page. When she was done, she submitted it anonymously to the school's literary magazine. 2 weeks later, the piece appeared in print, untitled, but unmistakably hers. Teachers quoted it. Students reposted it. One teacher taped it to the classroom door. The words rippled through the hallways. She never claimed it publicly. She didn't need to. Graduation came on a breezy May afternoon. Families filled the football field, rows of folding chairs stretched across the green. Denise wore her Sunday best, tears in her eyes from the moment Nia walked out in her cap and gown. When her name was called, the crowd clapped like thunder. Not just her family, not just her teachers, but classmates too. People who had seen her rise. People who now understood her strength. After the ceremony, as photos were taken and hugs exchanged, Tyler, the same football captain who once laughed at her, approached sheepishly. "Hey, Nia, just, wanted to say congrats. And I'm sorry. For the locker stuff. For the jokes. All of it. You didn't deserve that." Nia looked at him, then nodded. "Thanks." That night, Denise made a simple dinner, fried catfish, collard greens, and cornbread, just the way Nia liked it. They sat at the kitchen table, the air filled with the hum of a ceiling fan and the buzz of summer just beginning. Nia opened her acceptance packet from Armstrong again, rereading the letter even though she'd memorized every word. She smiled. "What are you thinking about?" her mom asked. Nia looked up. "I'm thinking, I can't wait to lift in front of a crowd that's cheering for me." "You always had that in you," Denise said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. That night, before bed, Nia looked at herself in the mirror. Her frame was as broad as ever. Her arms strong, her skin deep and radiant. And for once, for real, she didn't wish to be smaller. She didn't wish to be lighter. She just stood there, tall and rooted, like the old oak tree in Forsyth Park, unmoving, undeniable, and entirely herself. And she smiled.